Hi everybody. Thank you for joining us. There we go. Hi everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thanks for joining us. For those that don't know me, my name's Emma Naggs. I'm the chair of Bath for Europe. And this evening we're welcoming Molly Scott Cato. So I'll just give it a few more minutes just to see if there are any latecomers that are joining, and then we'll be kicking off in a couple of minutes. Just to let you know that we will record this call. So if you don't want your face to be visible, you can turn off your video, and it doesn't make any difference. You'll still be able to see and hear everything that's going on. But I'll try and minimize the number of faces that are visible on the recording. But that would be great. Okay. The flood of people has slowed quite a lot.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Who was that? I didn't see.
It's Em from Cornwall.
Hi, Em. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. You?
Great. Yes, thanks.
Good, good.
So yeah, we're going to start in a minute or two.
Cool. I'll mute.
Thank you. Okay, so I think the flood of people has slowed significantly. Right, so welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. As I said to the earlier joiners, my name's Emma Naggs. I'm the chair of Bath for Europe. And this evening we're joined by Molly Scott Cato. Very pleased to welcome her back, one of our regular speakers. So just to give you an idea of the structure of this evening, Molly has prepared a little talk specifically about holding the EU close and how we can maintain our ties with Europe and maintain our sort of European values, considering the fact that Brexit happened at the end of January. So that will be probably between 15 to 20 minutes roughly, and then we'll have time for questions later. We hope to finish at about 7 o'clock, so it'll be about an hour. Molly may need to absent herself at possibly around 6:30 as her daughter is arriving, and Molly hasn't seen her for a very long time due to COVID-19, so obviously she's very
or seen
excited.
anybody actually.
Bless, it's hard when you live on your own. You really don't see very many people at all.
No, I only see my neighbours.
Yeah, yes, through the window when you do, maybe when you do a clap, when that was still happening. Okay, so just a few housekeeping things. If everyone could please stay on mute, just so that we aren't interrupting Molly and so that everyone can hear properly. If you have a question, please use the chat function. There's a button at the bottom. And you can just type a message in the chat, and I'll try and ask as many of the questions as possible. I apologize now if I don't get through to your question, but I'll try and make a selection of ones that sort of cover most of the topics. So for everyone that doesn't know, surely there can't be many, Molly Scott Cato is a Green Party politician, former MEP for the South West, served 2 and a bit terms, I think. Is that correct, Molly?
No, I was in my second one when we made that very disastrous decision.
Unfortunately. Also Professor of Economics, is that correct? I think I've got that.
That is correct.
Excellent. So like I said, Molly has been a staunch supporter of Bath for Europe and has been one of the key voices in the Remain campaign and the Stop Brexit campaign that was before the Brexit date at the end of January. We're always delighted to welcome her. So without further ado, I shall pass over to Molly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. Yeah, I'm not only a staunch supporter, I'm also coming to Bath tomorrow for my first slightly longer visit to see my parents at a distance through some Bath. But yes, having grown up in Bath, I know Bath very well, and I was there near the beginning of your being founded, and what a great job you've done as a group. And actually, it's really nice to see so many people still invested in this idea of staying close to the EU, and also quite emotional for me. I haven't spoken that much about this issue since we left, but I have really been going through quite a difficult grieving process, as I'm sure a lot of you have. And it's important and encouraging that we're all still committed to, as you said, Emma, our European values and staying close to our European neighbours, because I think we've all recognised that we're in the long haul now. I know some people immediately, we didn't manage to stop Brexit, and when the attempts to work cross-party collapsed, and you know, we were obviously moving towards an election, and then we had the, as I see it, disastrous election result. You know, a lot of people were like, oh, rejoin now. And I have to say, my own view is that that's not a strong political position to take now. But I think what I'm going to talk about now, and obviously I'm interested to hear what you think as well, is what position we take now. And I think it is very much about upholding values and keeping those relationships going. Because what we've got ahead of us, I think, you know, the fact that we're for Europe still suggests that we understand that there's a very hard road ahead of us now. Obviously, we're going to see a lot of job losses because of COVID, but we're also going to see the impacts of Brexit, and depending on what happens in the negotiations, which I'll talk about a bit, that could be worse or even worse. I think, you know, we're all aware of the economic hits that we're likely to take. And I think our task through that period is to keep pointing out when the losses are about Brexit. The government will try to hide behind COVID. And as an economist, you know, the sort of economic devastation we're seeing, and we're just at the beginning of it now, is, you know, it is unprecedented. And people can say, like, you know, the bad winter of 1760 or whatever it is, but that was nothing like the economy we have now. We've never seen such rapid loss of economic activity. And of course, being in a situation of such turbulence, because we're leaving the main economic and trade structure we've been a part of for 40 years, just really exacerbates the situation. And I think we have to be clear about pointing out that Brexit reality. I said to somebody the other day, maybe I'll just have "I told you so" kind of tattooed across my forehead, but did you have to try very hard to do it in a subtle way that doesn't alienate people? But nonetheless, we do have to be clear about the lies that were told and the real consequences of the decision that we made. But I think the other side of that is continuing to celebrate the European connections that we have, and to build on those, and to think of structures for ensuring that those are there, because obviously the EU was itself a structure that kept us in close relationship and understanding what's going on. And tomorrow, for example, I've invited 2 of my MEP friends to speak at an event that, you know, is nominally organised here in Stroud, but it could be anywhere, and you're very welcome to join as well. And that's about what Green New Deals look like in other European countries, and, you know, what we can learn. And I think it's important to keep having those connections and to keep bringing people in. And of course, now we've all learned about Zoom meetings, it's very easy to invite somebody from anywhere in Europe to join your meeting. And I think that's something, it was always easy, but people, I've tried it a lot in the past, and people are like, no, we can't do that. You've got to travel. But of course, nobody can say that anymore. So I think in a way that opens up more opportunities, and let's make use of those to keep our connections with other EU countries and with EU friends. And perhaps most importantly of all, we need to keep that going for younger people who perhaps haven't been you know, so aware of the connections that we've made, and haven't lived through the process of joining and leaving, and particularly young people who are in school and who are coming to voting age now. You know, it's very important that we keep the connections open for them, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that at the end. But first of all, I'll just talk about what's happening with the Brexit negotiations, because this is receiving an incredibly small amount of coverage. You probably saw Barnier stand up in London this evening. All of them came on Eurostar with sturdy Alex and their face masks, which was quite entertaining for those who follow on Twitter. But obviously those negotiations have been seriously impeded by the fact that face-to-face negotiations haven't been possible, because you'll know, if you've been in any kind of political negotiation, that those kind of side meetings and body language and all of that stuff is really important, and that hasn't been possible. I was in a debrief meeting with Barnier a couple of weeks ago by Zoom, obviously. And so I'm just going to report to you the kind of what I picked up from that. I would say the first thing is, I'm sure you played your part in trying to say we need an extension, but I think the recklessness with which the UK government dismissed the idea of having a longer negotiating period is quite shocking, but it also indicates that actually not only are they not concerned about not having a deal, they may actually not want to have a deal. It was clear that the EU had been very clear that they would extend the period by another 2 years, and that would have, you know, they said that before COVID. It's so much more important now. The thought of trying to renegotiate your trading position in the world in the midst of a global pandemic is clearly just absurd and reckless. And it kind of gives a hint to what this government's about, which is just all about the ideology and not looking at the evidence at all. And then at the same time, we're seeing that the idea that we'll somehow set up new trading partners and trading relationships in the middle of a global pandemic is also absurd. You know, how people can't even travel to meet the people that they would be having those trade negotiations with. So all that guff, and I think deceitful guff around global Britain, has also been incredibly, I'm just going to switch off, somebody's walking there, it's very distracting, are all going to be seriously undermined by, you know, by the changes that we're seeing because of the pandemic. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of kind of rather disturbing news and disturbing prospects in terms of how the negotiations are going, and also what our other alternatives are. And now we're seeing the Chinese situation and suddenly rapid growing hostility to China, which obviously, you know, my whole time as an MEP, I was pointing out was rather stupid to have the Chinese Communist Party running a nuclear power station. And I worked a lot with the Tibetans, so I was always concerned about Chinese human rights, but suddenly every other Tory is now worrying about that as well. And obviously, if you've got the US, which is becoming protectionist and undermining global trading institutions, you've got China, which is now becoming hostile. We're saying we're not trading with them, and we're breaking our relationships with the third big trading bloc in the world. You know, what is the upside of all of that? The slightly better news is that the Germans took over the presidency on the 1st of July, and if anybody will get a deal, it'll be the Germans, because they are great deal makers and they will always go the extra mile to get that deal. But also, of course, in this case, they're, I think, the most strongly pro-single market, but also pro-Britain. You know, they've been so supportive and kind of incredibly absorbing, I think, of all the offensive remarks that have been made in their direction. And of course they are, I know it's a stereotype, but in my experience, they are also very efficient. So we're in the best possible hands, I would say, in terms of getting a deal. But the timescales are incredibly short. And the British side is saying they have to have a deal by the end of July. So that's like 3 weeks, guys. But nobody knows if that's just a sort of threat or serious. The whole problem with the EU negotiating side is nobody's sure what's serious and what isn't. I'm not sure either. But there is a hard deadline at the end of October, because unlike in Britain, where the government will effectively decide and just get nodded through Parliament, no need for parliamentary scrutiny or proper debate, on the EU side, the agreement that's reached will have to go through the Parliament, the national parliaments, the sub-regional parliaments where that's relevant. So Belgium, I think, for example. So that will take 3 months. So if there's no deal by the end of October, there is no deal. I think there's this misunderstanding on the British side, which is that the chicken game that they played last time will work. So, you know, the EU goes right down to the wire before it makes a deal. I've just explained to you that that's wrong, because there's a need for ratification. But also it's just misguided as a strategy once you're outside. I mean, it worked when we were inside the EU because we still had some leverage. Effectively, we have very little leverage now. And this idea of sort of pushing them down to the wire is, I think, nonsensical. And it may just be a bluff covering a desire for no deal. So I don't really need to go over what the negotiations are about, because I know you know that. The level playing field is tremendously important, and it's very important in terms of keeping the sort of values and standards and legal protections that we've had as members of the EU. So I hear Barnier say he's going to protect the level playing field, which means that if we're trading strongly and with good access into the European market, we have to keep to European rules over tax, over animal welfare standards, over pollution, you know, the whole range. I hear him say that, but I remember that he buckled last time and allowed that to be taken out of the withdrawal agreement and put into the political declaration. So, but this is where I'm reassured that the Germans are there and hopefully will not let him buckle again. We've got what I think of as a bit of a non-argument around fisheries, but there's a lot of hot air spoken around that. You know, the Brits, we want 200 miles, even if that's partly into France. No, I'm joking, but, you know, 200-mile limit we want, and full sovereignty regardless of what the fish think. And the deal has always been between access to markets and access to waters. I think there's a deal to be made there. And then we've got the issue of governance and sovereignty, and this is really problematic because the EU will insist on continuing oversight by the ECJ, and that's really problematic if you think of the likes of Marc Francois and their kind of pompous chat about governance. You know, I think that will always be difficult. So there are some really big crunches in terms of the negotiations. Barnier is always optimistic, and he's always like, oh, well, we're still trying to get a deal. So he's quite inscrutable in a way. It's quite hard to know what's really going on. And as I say, I had confidence in him last time, up to the point when he really buckled. And I think I raised questions with him in a meeting at that point. And for the first time, he kind of didn't answer the questions and was quite heated in response. So I think he knew he'd buckled. And so I don't find him a terribly reliable negotiator since that. But I don't think the Parliament will allow him to undermine the single market this time around. And the Parliament has actually said that they want dynamic alignment with rulemaking, which means if the EU strengthens its protection against pollution, let's say, then the UK has to also meet that higher standard to continue trading without restrictions and without tariffs. So that's a big ask. I'm not sure how far the Parliament's prepared to push that. But in terms of whether or not we're going to get a deal, obviously the Commission will prepare emergency legislation to cover things like driving licenses and flights and roaming charges, whatever, you know, the nitty-gritty of our relationship, security as well, and information sharing. That will need to be sorted out in side agreements if we don't get a deal. And those, they call them preparedness fiches, but there we are. Those will have to be prepared this month if they're going to be ready in time. And when I heard Barnier a couple of weeks ago, he said so far they haven't started drawing up that legislation, but I think they are increasingly of the opinion that no deal is a real possibility. Okay, so what are we doing and what can we do now we're no longer EU members? I understand that you are affiliated to the European movement, and I'm on the Council of the European Movement, and I think that's a good, strong organisation to work with. I mean, obviously, what we need now is an organisation that keeps us in a strong relationship with the European Union, and it's kind of like there to maintain that relationship. And I think the European Movement is that organisation. All the other organisations that existed were sort of about stopping Brexit or various aspects of that, and they are all continuing, and it's still, I would say, quite a dynamic position regarding these organisations. But obviously the European Movement has very strong pedigree going back to 1949, and it sort of supervised us going into the European Union, or, you know, was part of that process. But since we've been members, I would say it's declined, but it's very much sprung back into life because of the campaigning to stop Brexit. And I think it's, anyway, to me, it seems the right organisation to be a member of, and that's why I'm giving it my time. And 150 local groups are signed up now to that organisation. And I think they're still kind of deciding how they work with the local groups, how they work with the 4 Europe groups, you know, what their role is. But they've got some really excellent staff, and we're trying to make it a bit more diverse, shall I say, because there is a sort of tendency for it to be old white men. But let's all do what we can. My sense is it's worth trying to improve that, because it is probably the organisation that we need. And the staff there, I think, were excellent, sharing information, organising campaigning against the refusal to ask for an extension. And now they're running this no to no deal campaign. I must say, with an 80-seat majority in Parliament, I can't feel very energised about any of these things. I find it hard to imagine we're going to be able to change any of these things. So it's absolutely right, as I said previously, to point out where this government's going wrong, the dangers they're exposing us to, the unravelling of their lies. But I'm not, and obviously this campaigning achieves those things. But in terms of whether the government's going to change its course, I really don't have much confidence that it will. So the European movement is, I think, going to adopt a sort of overarching slogan, which is maintaining our access, protecting our standards. It's not terribly catchy, but I think it does sum up what we should all be doing now. Because obviously, when we say maintaining our access, part of that is about access for exporters, access to the single market for businesses, but it's also about our access, whether that's young people wanting to still be part of Erasmus or school trips, or our access because we still have the ability to use our mobile phones, or whatever it is. That access we've enjoyed as members of the European Union should be maintained. And obviously, from a Green Party perspective, I'm strongly arguing that we should still have freedom of movement. And I find it shocking and horrifying that you would have a government that would take freedoms away from us and our children and then celebrate that. I think freedom of movement has sort of, when people hear that, they hear uncontrolled immigration, and I'm afraid to say they have a racist response to that. And very rarely is it pointed out that actually the freedom that's being lost is our freedom in our own continent to have all those opportunities. So I think, maintaining our access is absolutely key to what we're about, our access to everything we enjoyed as members of the European Union. But also protecting our standards is very important as well, because we all know that a lot of the point of Brexit was for tax avoidance, for deregulation, for turning the UK really into some kind of screwdriver economy sitting on the edge of the single market. And that's exactly why they're determined to not allow us to do that, and then to make goods cheaply because we have low standards, and then undermine their standards by selling those goods in their market. And that's really the crux of the negotiations. And I think certainly I'm very clear, and I think most people on the Remain side are very clear, that one of the things we valued about the EU was very much those standards. And again, that's something that's really worth pointing out in conversations or in letters to paper or in social media. All these attacks on the standards that there've been, and the agriculture bill that was in the House of Lords today is a good vehicle for stressing that. And so, what happened in the Commons is that the standards on farming and on animal welfare and so on are put at risk by a negotiation with the US and a trade deal with the US. And the Lords at the moment are holding out against that. And I would expect some of the amendments there to be passed saying these standards must be kept. And that's a sort of focused fight about keeping these standards that are so important. Then I think another thing which I find really disturbing is the absolute lack of planning and conversation and preparedness for what's going to happen at the borders at the end of December. Now, obviously, if it's no deal, that will just be chaos. But the truth is, even if it's deal, it will be chaos, because HMRC aren't prepared, businesses aren't prepared for the customs arrangements. And the British government's response to this is always something like, oh, we'll just waive all those rules. But, so then if they waive the rules, then we don't know what kind of rubbish might be imported. But even if they don't check anything on the way in, the EU is going to check stuff on the way into their markets. So we'll still end up with a massive traffic jam of trucks down by Dover, where 80% of our imported products comes into the country. So all that chaos around no deal that caused such heartache a year ago, to me it's even more real this time, because I knew that I knew that we would almost certainly end up in a transition period. It's the end of the transition period that's the real risky point, and either because people are bored, or because they're just heartbroken, or because they're distracted by COVID, people are not focusing on that. But it is really important for all businesses and for anybody who eats tomatoes or all the other vegetables that come in from the EU. So I think there's quite a lot of jobs there. I think it's great that Bath for Europe still exists, but I think we need to build the right sort of structures we need to keep those relationships close, but also to enable the sorts of connections that we had while we were members of the EU, and also prior to our joining the EU, actually, which have dissolved because they were kept in place by the structures that the EU provided for us. And so I think that's a great job for the 4 Europe groups to play, including Bath for Europe. And it's also something that I know the European movement is thinking about. So in terms of keeping close, I mean, I've received just so much affection and sympathy and warmth still from my European colleagues, and my perception is there's a kind of understanding. Maybe this is just the sort of people I meet with, but even, you know, ordinary Europeans, I think their main approach is concern. I would say the main feeling you get is concern. I think they do kind of understand that we've got this post-imperial insanity going on, and we've always needed to sort that out. We're going to have to sort that now. To me, it very much plays into the Black Lives Matter discussion, our refusal to look at our history honestly, and our sort of delusion that everybody else in the world enjoyed the British Empire as much as we did. And that is going to have to be dealt with now. So I think people aren't as stupid as we think, and when they look at us, they probably see quite a lot of this identity crisis going on, and they're quite worried about us. But of course, we've also got the tragic situation where we now are clear that the majority of people in this country do want to stay, would want to stay in the EU. And obviously every year that majority will increase because younger people are much more pro-EU than older people, although that's something that we need to make sure is maintained, because without being members, that could slip, and younger people could fail to understand the benefits. So that is a job for us, I think. You may have seen the, I think it was a Cato poll last week, which showed that if there was a referendum now, 56% would vote to remain and 44% to leave. So, you know, an 8-point differential. It's not huge, but we really haven't seen the unraveling yet. But anyway, I mean, it was clear to me before the election that the majority had moved, and that seems to be just gaining pace now. Also noticeable that the EU has become more popular in every country, including those that are suffering badly economically. And I think the coronavirus does underline the importance of cooperation, that we need solidarity and support, and also, of course, that global problems have to be sorted out together. You know, splendid isolation will not work against a virus. I expect a lot of you have also seen the great work that's been done by my dear friend Terry Reintke on the EU-UK Friendship Group. Now, my understanding of that group is it's pretty much about what happens in Parliament, but they're also going to organise events with the European Parliament office in London, which had to be impartial before we left, but is not at all impartial now, and is very keen on keeping a good, really, not a good relationship, but a good image for the European Union in London, and is organising events to that end, some of them in cooperation with Terry's group. She has a very good steering group there. She has Nathalie Loiseau, who you may recall was Macron's right-hand woman in the Parliament until she blotted her copybook. She would have become the leader of his group there. Radek Sikorski, who's the former foreign minister of Poland and married to Anne Applebaum, and a kind of real international mover and shaker. So he's a very good guy to have there. And Katharina Barley, who's a German member and close to Angela Merkel. So, you know, I would say that's a top-notch gang to have in charge of this project. And I feel very encouraged that they are committed to maintaining close relationships with us. And then in terms of what we can do, I'd really like to hear what's happening with twinning in Barchi. I've said at the beginning that it's very sad that we have to move away from being part of the EU to just thinking about twin towns. But I do think, you know, that's one of the things we've got. Eventually put into that would really be repaid. And of course, when I was involved in twinning, which was like when I was at school, there were probably only 8 members of the EU or something. So you like had a twin town in Germany and one in France, and that felt quite exotic and exciting in those days. But now, you know, there's 27 other countries there, and I think it would be really interesting if in an area like the Southwest, you know, people chose different counties maybe to have connections with different countries. So across the region, we would really had the whole thing covered. And I think there's a lot that we could learn, and we could really, I mean, we've all got relationships, obviously, with certain countries in the EU that we know better or worse, but I think we could really start to build those relationships and actually become very good Europeans in terms of knowing a lot about what happens in other countries. We tend to be pretty bad Europeans in this country, and obviously learning languages, learning about political systems. As a Green, I obviously have a lot of good news to share at the moment about the advance of the Greens, which I always make sure I share in as many places as I can for political reasons, but I also think sharing the news about what's happening in other European countries. So, for example, the Croatian Greens got their first members of parliament the day before yesterday, so that was very exciting. But it's also interesting to know that we've got the worst democracy in Europe, the only one that doesn't have a proportional system. Oldest democracy in the world and not kept up to scratch, unfortunately. So I think that whole area is really important. I'd love to hear what you're doing in that area or what's happening with Bath twinning. And then the last thing is, again, about young people and Erasmus and school exchanges. Now, we haven't lost on Erasmus. There are countries that are part of Erasmus that aren't part of the single market, aren't even in the EEA. And so Erasmus, I think, would always be available to us. And to me, it's still a very good platform. It's not all about university exchanges. It's also about apprenticeship exchanges. It's open to everybody. And I think what it achieves is giving access to Europe to young people from poorer homes whose parents cannot afford to organise that for them, or whose parents don't have friends in other European countries. And some of my members of staff came from those sort of backgrounds, and there's no way they would ever have come to work with me or actually travelled in Europe and become real Europeans without access to the Erasmus programme. So I think we absolutely have to keep insisting on that. Even if there's no trade deal, whatever happens, we can still carry on with that, because it's just right that young people shouldn't have their horizons narrowed. And obviously school exchanges is another thing which I don't know how much they rely on EU relationships, but whether or not, it feels a lot more important that we have school exchanges with Europe now. And I know that often a school exchange is like flying off to Cancun and sitting on the beach, but maybe if we have influence in schools, we could sort of suggest that it might be more constructive to keep relationships going in our continent, because I don't foresee a war in Europe particularly soon, but I am very aware of the fact that the reason there's been no war in Europe in my lifetime is because of active creation of these connections. And some of the connections I was involved with most were through EU research programs. And it wasn't the research that you produced that was important there, it was the relationships that you built. And I traveled to lots of different countries and obviously had close relationships with European academics. And so many of the European programs are like that. Superficially, you can say, well, what's that actually achieved? But fundamentally, it's about keeping those strong connections. And obviously, we're now outside of most of those systems. So I think we have to find ways to build new systems and new connections in a very conscious way, whereas those things were easily available during our EU membership. So that's all I wanted to say. I'm very interested to have feedback from you. I mean, questions, if there are questions I can answer, but otherwise contributions would be welcome as well, and just having an update on where you're all at. So thank you very much for listening. Look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Molly. That was really great. So we're using the chat for questions. So if anyone has any questions, just put them in the chat. But Molly, just to update you on the twinning. So Bath is twinned with 4 different cities already. So
this I know because I grew up there. So I did my twinning in Bath. Are they still the same? I'm interested to hear.
There's Aix-en-Provence in France, Braunschweig in Germany, Capsavar in Hungary, and Alkmaar in the
Alkmaar, yeah. I've been to 3 of those. I think the Hungarian one's new. But
it's quite recent.
So you see how twinning was so effective for me, because I went to 3 of those places as part of twinning.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. And actually we have a monthly sort of catch-up call that happens the first Sunday of every month, and our next one at the beginning of August, we're inviting someone from the Bath Twinning Association to talk about twinning in Bath and hopefully get some more people involved and sort of build our links with that as well. But yeah, absolutely, that the things that you've been talking about, we're obviously been trying to continue to build and sort of keep these friendship groups that we've created through Bath for Europe, and trying to keep these connections going, particularly through COVID-19, which has been a bit tricky with the advent of Zoom. As you say, a lot of people have got a lot more familiar with it, and it does make it easier to communicate and stay in touch. So we really want to stay together as much as we can and continue our work with sort of promoting European values as much as we can. But great. I go through a few of the questions. There's a couple that I'm sort of going to push together because they were about before the election. You did quite a lot of work on the bad boys of Brexit, sort of exposing some of the contacts behind Brexit. And really the question is, obviously, particularly recently, people like Dominic Cummings and even Boris Johnson and all these people have seemed to be pushing the boundaries so far. First of all, do you think this is why a no-deal Brexit is the way that the government is going? Do you think it's to do with these bad boys of Brexit and that it benefits them and no one else? And secondly, is there anything that we can do as activists to expose them or do anything to help at all?
Well, I think one of the things that you notice is that I don't have as much capacity now, because I was never just myself. I had sort of 6 full-time equivalent staff, and a lot of the work that I was doing was obviously done by them. So that's why I can't carry on doing all that scrutiny, which is actually very frustrating because it needs to be done right now. I do what I can, but I'm now just me. But I would say absolutely yes. I think the bad boys are still benefiting in various ways. I mean, I already discussed tax avoidance, but there's obviously also financial volatility. If you're a hedge fund person, then that's exactly what you're looking for. So every time somebody says, oh, there'll be a deal, there won't be a deal, then you definitely, you can gamble against the outcomes and just profit from the volatility while everybody else suffers. And probably COVID-19 is great for them as well. I find it hard to imagine their world, because it's a world of extreme selfishness, psychopathy and irresponsibility. And it's kind of like the opposite of the world I live in. So I say these things, but I find it hard to connect emotionally with what they're doing. But I do believe that that's what they're doing. And I think, but surely there's 2 lessons people have learned, surely, as a result of COVID. One is populism is a really bad way to choose leaders. All the countries that have populist leaders have failed dismally through this pandemic. So if you have a leader who doesn't care about you and says anything to get elected and seeks office for their own psychological or financial benefit, then when a crisis comes, you're in a really bad place. So I think we should definitely underline that. Our government, the reason we have the government we do is because they've been selected on the basis of loyalty to the Prime Minister and complete ideological purity where Brexit's concerned. And most of them are absolutely hopeless. You could find people easily in Parliament or out of Parliament who are much better than them. So, I think that's surely an important lesson from this crisis. Why have we got the highest death toll per million in the world, which we may be exceeded by Brazil, but at the moment that's true, because we've had really bad political responses. And I think the other thing is we've learned about community and solidarity, and my perception is that people have much more radical outlook in terms of what they think should happen in terms of social justice, let's say. And something about the experience that we're still going through, really, about looking out for each other, about which people in the economy we really value. There's something that's very radicalizing about that. And I feel like if COVID had come a year earlier, we could definitely have stopped Brexit. So it's kind of very frustrating, except I do think we need to go through that kind of national reawakening, really, around our imperialist past. So maybe it had to happen. Maybe it's a good thing it's happening now, is the only bright side. But yes, I mean, I don't really understand who the players are, but I absolutely think there are a lot of people now influencing government in a way that's totally undemocratic and picking apart the civil service and operating for their own benefits in terms of undermining democracy and setting up an authoritarian state. And it's deeply concerning.
I completely agree. Personally, watching the sort of slow decline of democracy is very agonizing.
My daughter's here. Sorry, I have to go and say hello to her. I heard my gate go. I'll come back in a mo. Sorry, can I leave you to it?
Yeah, no worries. So I don't know, maybe we could have a little discussion. Obviously, there's quite a lot of people on the call. Does anybody, actually, I'm just going to mute Molly so she can privately greet her daughter. Does anyone want to make a point, or that I can unmute? If you want to raise your hand, if you go on participants, and then I can unmute you, hopefully. And if you click on participants, and then there should be a button there that says raise your hand. I've got Isabella Fenn, hang on. Isabella, if you want to unmute yourself and maybe make your point. I can't see Isabella. Okay, sorry, Isabella, I can't unmute you. So I see there's obviously been quite a conversation in the chat. There's a lot about pharmaceutical and medicines. I completely agree. It is quite concerning, particularly at the moment with COVID. Obviously, it makes it pretty concerning about all the possible restrictions on things like that. Who else have we got?
I think people will have to unmute themselves, by the
Yes.
way.
Mm-hmm.
If you,
Yeah.
maybe Isabella can unmute herself.
Or Mike Cashman as well.
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Hi, Mike.
Okay, I was on a call with Michael Duggan last week, Professor Michael Duggan,
Mm-hmm.
and he made I thought it was a very interesting point that the ambition for the deal is now so tiny in terms of what it's seeking to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
You know, assuming that it doesn't get a complete, you know, free trade deal with ignoring all the EU standards, but in terms of the realistic ambition for what it'll achieve, the ambition is so tiny that there's actually almost no difference between a deal and no deal. Don't know what anybody thinks of that.
Yeah. Molly's back, so she may have a
Yeah, I'm interested that he says that. I don't think that's the case, actually. I think there still is quite a significant difference. I mean, I suppose you could argue that what we might end up with now is just the tidying up type arrangements rather than a trade deal. But I think that's, you know, there's a very significant difference between ensuring that it's not illegal for you to drive in Bulgaria and making sure that companies here can export their goods. That's still, to me, a very significant difference. And yeah, I think even if we just think about drugs, you know, it's going to be difficult, time consuming and expensive to import drugs from other European countries if we don't have a clear arrangement and a deal for doing that. So yeah, I'm interested in why he said that. I'll think about that more, because obviously I value his opinion as you do.
Yeah, no, thank you.
We've had a question about associate citizenship. So I know this is something that I've seen you speak about before. But one, is it possible? And two, is it true that there's a court case going through the ECJ to test that out?
There's a video somewhere where on YouTube where I talk about this, perhaps at more length, and certainly when I was kind of thinking about it more than I am now. But my position has always been, well, the legal position is there's no such thing as European citizenship. You have European citizenship by virtue of being a member of a country that's part of the EU. So in that sense, there is no legal ability to have associate citizenship. And there are quite a few problems with it, because obviously if Britons could have associate citizenship, we would be free riding on the system that the other states are creating. And that's why the EU would be really unlikely to say yes to that. Because why would you allow a Brit to have access to free movement, for example, without sticking to the laws that are part of the system, which free movement's also a part of? If you, that is exactly the sort of cherry picking that would undermine unity and the of common purpose that the EU is. The other point is, well, I'll pay for that, then obviously then EU citizenship becomes something for the wealthy, which I think would also be actually very divisive and unhelpful in terms of going back into full membership of the European Union. So I think in that sense, in the sense of trying to cling on to the rights that we've lost through Brexit, I don't think the EU can ever accept that. And I would, my fundamental desire is to support the EU in its strength as an excellent project, and then rejoin, rather than doing something that might help us in the short run, but would ultimately undermine the European project. But I think so. I think associate citizenship as such is not a goer, but there might be something where we could have a sort of claim as being pro-European and try and build that up as an organisation where we were sort of pledging our support as opposed to trying to use our rights. That, I think, is a more interesting proposition. And I think some people think that's what associate citizenship might do. And as such, I think it would be good. And I'm not quite sure what the formal structure would be, but if it was about us you know, it's kind of like ask not what you can do for your country, ask what your country can do for you, or something like that. The original associate citizenship proposal was very much people saying, oh God, I still want to go to my holiday home in France. That part, I think the EU has to say no to. But if it's about what can I do to continue to say that I'm continuing to support European values, then yeah, that might have some. But I don't think anybody's made a proposal like that yet, but it's worth considering.
Yeah. Linked to that, speaking earlier about Erasmus, you said that there were countries that are non-EU members that are still members of Erasmus. Are there any other sort of EU bodies that we could, as activists and campaigners, lobby to stay a part of that would accept non-EU members?
That's a really good question, and I remember asking myself that question in January, and I must admit I haven't done much research to follow up on that. But there are obviously a lot of bodies that are European bodies and not under the auspices of the EU. So standards bodies, the Renewable Energy Association, you know, and I think what I was thinking then, and that's why it's good that this has been raised again, is that it's a very good idea to join up to any of those that you can and be active as a Brit in anything that's a European body, but doesn't require you to be an EU citizen or part of an EU member state in order to be part of it. But I think professional bodies, lawyers' organisations, for example, they tend to be just by virtue of your country, and I think therefore being active in those is a very good idea right now.
Great. So we'll do a bit of research into that one as well. Will the pain of a no-deal Brexit be necessary or indeed effective in bringing leavers around to the Remain cause?
Well, like I said, I think this has become a long haul now and quite a deep and difficult issue. And I think there's two things that can change the situation we're in now. One is just demography, and that's why it's important that young people continue to have that exposure to Europe, and I don't think young people will become insular and inward looking because they tend to think on a global basis, but they might not recognise and value what membership of the European Union offers. I think that's definitely a task for us, but they're certainly not inclined to the sort of anti-immigration, racist kind of rhetoric that really gave rise to Brexit. So I think that's an important contribution we can make. Sorry, I'm getting very distracted. I will go in a bit because I know my daughter's here and it's quite emotionally difficult. But just repeat that question again so I get the second part of it.
What was the question? Oh, I've lost it now. Hang on. Oh yes. Do you think a no deal, the pain of a no deal, will be effective?
Oh yeah. So the other part of this is like what I was talking about before, where I think we're just going to have to go through a difficult process of reassessing our place in the world. And when I was born, it was 15 years, I think, since Indian independence. And we still had bits of the empire in Africa when I was born. So for a lot of people, that memory of ruling the world is recent and precious. And of course, you know, in school, I didn't learn about slavery. I didn't learn about the Amritsar massacre. I didn't learn about, you know, the way people were treated in Britain's African colonies or the Mau Mau rebellion or any of these things. And so it's no wonder that British people feel proud of empire, because we don't understand what its consequences were. And I know the EU isn't the same as empire, but to me, this is part of just a reappraisal of our history and our place in the world. We still think we can go it alone because there's that kind of folk memory of ruling the world. And so I think this is a long and difficult psychological process. And like I said earlier, I do think that Black Lives Matter, you know, the protests and the thinking that's gone on around that is helping us forward here. And to me, it feels quite exciting to think about fundamental changes in assessing our place in the world. And I do think that the people who are part of our communities but whose ancestors were part of the colonies really have something important and valuable to offer there.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Can you give us something to be happy about?
Well, like I said, I'm not through this yet in terms of a mourning process, so I'm not really sure I can, to be honest with you. I think that there's quite a lot of a positive side to COVID, I would say. in terms of the way it changes the way we think about our community and what's important in our society. But in terms of leaving the EU, I think we're only just on the edge of that being very difficult. I suppose the positive thing is we're on the right side of history. I have absolutely no doubt about that. And we can always feel that we did the right thing to save our country right down to the wire. And I know you all gave everything you could, and I gave everything I could. And that gives me some comfort. But, you know, saying I told you so like that, that doesn't make me happy, I'm afraid.
No, absolutely not. So yeah, and I think obviously things like the drop in pollution over the last few months, it really proves beyond a shadow of a doubt really that climate change is man-made, and that if we were to make drastic actions, that hopefully it would make a difference relatively quickly. So I hope that that would be the case.
Yeah, people have connected to nature better, and 90% of people say they don't want to go back to normal and they want urgent action on climate change, which from a green perspective is excellent. But I think the most important thing we've learned is that governments are really powerful and they can act really swiftly and find the money to pay for things that are important. So, you know, we need to just apply that to climate change. That is a positive thing. It's just not a positive thing about Brexit.
About Brexit, no, there aren't many positive things about Brexit, unfortunately.
I can't find any, I'm afraid.
No. Well, it may be that, as you say, well, we now have the strongest, the biggest pro-European group in the whole of Europe, which means the whole of the world, really, because there's no one else that's going to be so pro-European. And really groups like ours and people like everybody here on this call, I recognise a lot of faces from some of the other groups around the country, and being able to sort of hold ourselves together and still build these links and still continue these friendships. I think that's one of the things that Bath for Europe is going to focus on. We really want to carry this forward and not let go of all the work and all the relationships and all the friendships and all the networking that we did over that period of time. And like you say, the European movement, we're affiliated with them, and also we've built such strong links with other groups all across the country. And for me personally, I think this has been one of the best things that I've ever done, and the friendships and the relationships that have come from it have just been absolutely incredible. So thank you to everybody on the call, whether I've met you before or never have new to this. But yeah, I think we really have to be proud of what we did, even though ultimately we didn't stop Brexit. But I think we all did an incredible job, however big or small your contribution was. And I will always be proud of doing it. So I will never, ever regret campaigning to stop Brexit.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think that's a source of great pride that we have the strongest pro-European movement in Europe, and that's well known. And yeah, we did everything we could, and I think it's the way our side behaved is also something to be proud of. And we just have to, because that is demonstrating our values. We didn't tell lies, we didn't manipulate people. We stayed positive and we kept those strong relationships going, and that's something to be really proud of. Yeah,
absolutely. Brilliant. So I've seen the time. I know you're obviously very keen to see your daughter, so we won't dilly-dally.
I wouldn't mind, and we had quite a positive. We managed to find something quite positive to say.
Exactly. Yes. So for me, my Brexit dividend is all of the people that I managed to meet through all of the campaigning. So I hope that that's the same for a lot of other people. But thank you very much, Molly, for spending some time with us. You're welcome back at any time. You're obviously possibly one of our most frequent speakers, I think. But it
would definitely be nice to come in person. And as you know, I never refuse an invitation to Bath.
Fabulous. Well, hopefully one day we'll be able to meet again. That would be lovely. But thank you very much. It's been fantastic. We're hoping to announce some more dates for speaker events in August and September, so keep an eye on either our website, which is bathforeurope.com, or we have a Facebook group as well under Bath for Europe. Sign up if you're not already a member. You can get our email newsletter as well. As I mentioned, the first Sunday of every month we do a local it's really a social and a coffee and chat. And we started inviting some speakers. So next Sunday, the 5th of August, 7th of August, I think it's the 7th of August, we'll have the Bath Twinning Association who'll be joining us. So that would be lovely if you're able to join us for that. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining. We've recorded the session, so we'll share it on our social media channels soon once it's been put onto YouTube. And yeah, please keep in touch, and hopefully we'll continue to have some more events like this, and we will obviously invite you whenever we can. Thank you very much for joining us. Hope you have a lovely evening. Stay safe, everybody, and hope to see you again very soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Emma.
No worries. See you. Bye. Right.